To Be an Adventurer, authored by Gail Ovan, narrated by Gail Ovan. Chapter 1. The Day. It was a warm summer's day. Rota had finally reached the age of 16, graduated from his Academy of Basic Studies, and was now considered by Larray law to be an adult. He wanted to join the Purple Roses Guild, but his father was out on an expedition, as he so often was, and Rota wanted to see the proud look in his father's eyes when he joined. So he was waiting for his father to return. And this particular day was the day that he was supposed to. A whole crowd formed around the entrance to the city. People were standing shoulder to shoulder just to see a glimpse of their returning heroes. Rota, being a little on the short side, failed to see over the other excited bystanders. He pushed and he shoved his way to the front. He looked down the road entering the city. The adventurers were like little specks on the horizon. As they grew nearer and larger, the crowd grew louder and rowdier. At the point when the adventurers were finally in view, it was so loud as to make Rota fear that his ears would explode. He looked up and down the adventurers that had walked into the city. Each of them was holding a bag of loot, as was typical for this kind of venture, and one item that they had to show off to all of the civilians. One of them was holding a golden chalice that he would occasionally swirl around to pretend to drink from. Another was admiring a new shiny dagger, swaying it around to watch the light reflect off of it. One appeared to be holding nothing, though you could tell that his possession was a new bright blue medallion, as it was much too nice to fit in with his other apparel. It was nice seeing so many fun new shiny objects entering the city, but the longer he looked, the more Rota felt that something was off. A deep weight set in his stomach, like he had eaten a gold brick. The screams and shouts of the crowd didn't make him feel any better. Rota searched the group that had entered the city. Not even one of them resembled his dad. The weight that was in his stomach now moved up to his throat, as if to escape from his mouth. The explosive bellows from the crowd now felt like he had swallowed a bolt of thunder, and it was bouncing around in his insides. But in time, the crowd quieted and dispersed as the adventurers had passed and were all headed towards their guild hall. Rota followed them. He watched as each of the adventurers entered the guild. Rota stood there, just staring at the building. He had not been in since the last time Motoka was in town, 3 months ago. Since then, the building's trim had been repainted. Instead of the faded blue that in its later years looked closer to white as to be indistinguishable from it, to a deep crimson red. The new color of the building made it look huge and ominous. Rota felt as if something was wrong. This would be the first time he had entered the guild without his father, and the guild's new color made it feel less like another world, like he had felt of it in the past, and more like another dimension. Rota opens the large, gold-accented doors, and he walks in. He doesn't see any of the adventurers from earlier, but he knows where they all went. The bar. He walks down the few hallways that it takes to get to the bar. He still remembers from the last time he came with Motoka. As he gets closer, the sounds of laughter get louder. The presence of the bar can be felt all the way from down the hall. Despite the cheerful sounds coming from the room, Rota felt weird. The question still rang in his head. Where's my dad? Rota opened the doors to the bar. Immediately, he was hit with the smell of booze and hard liquor. Not a soul looked to see his arrival. Rota scanned the room, looking for one of the adventurers that had just entered the city. He spotted one, the one carrying the dagger. She was a tall, slender woman, with long black hair that crept all down her back. Rota raced over to talk to her. She was showing off her fancy new dagger to a group of very drunk men, who were interested in everything about her, other than the dagger. Rota tapped her on the shoulder to get her attention. She spins around, swaying her long hair across his face. A breeze of her perfume wafts into his face. It was like something that he could barely recognize, but still sweet and delightful regardless. He looks her in the face. She is beautiful. Her face was lavished in makeup, but two things stood out about her face: her dark red lipstick, and her eyes that seemed to pass right through him. Rota took a moment to look her up and down. His father always said to be aware of everything when in an unknown environment. She wore tight black clothes that accentuated her chest and hips. She was beautiful for sure, one of the most beautiful he had ever seen. Hmm? She hummed, obviously annoyed that she was interrupted from what she was doing. He stammered. His eyes met hers again. Her eyes were off-putting to Rota. They seemed deceitful, almost like a cat's. Rota felt as if he couldn't trust her, but seeing as how important it was to ask about his father, he continued. But before he could say anything, the men that the woman was entertaining had turned around and began conversing with some of the other bar-goers. The woman looked back at the men. Seeing that she no longer had their attention, she stormed off, very annoyed. Rota didn't trust her. He didn't want to talk to her, especially after her childish tantrum. But seeing as Rota didn't have anybody else to ask about his father, he had to rely on her. So, Rota followed her. He followed her into the corner of the bar. There sat a staircase leading up to the second floor. There were 2 guards standing on either side of the stairway. They let the woman pass. Rota, with no concern for the guards, attempted to walk past them. The guards blocked his way. Only rank E members or higher can pass this point, they said. Please, it's about my father, Rota shouted towards the woman. She didn't stop. Motoka! She slowed her pace. He went on a mission with your group. He hasn't returned. The woman stopped and giggled. Him? I think I remember him. No wonder he's dead. There was no place for someone as weak as him to be on that mission. Rota's eyes widened. What are you talking about? Rota's eyes widened. What are you talking about? Rota growled. Rota felt a hole being pierced through his chest. What? Did you think that he was still alive? That loser was rank F. A wild animal could probably have killed him if it wanted to. She turned back and smirked at Rota. Rota believed that his father was exaggerating about his strength whenever he was talking about it. He even knew Motoka's low rank, but hearing this woman's slander of his father's good name affected him in a way he never expected. Rota rushed through the guards. They grabbed onto his arms before he could get past them. Who do you think you are? Rota screamed. Talking so low of an honest man, a hard-working man, a dead man. Rota felt as if his head were about to explode. The guards held the screaming Rota back. The commotion created invited some of the members from the higher floor to come investigate. What is it this time? A drunk old man that thinks he's good or something? One of them shouted while coming down the stairs. No, it's a little more interesting this time, the woman replied. It's some kid that's mad that his weak dad died. Who was he? Another one asked. Remember the dirty man with the hand-me-down sword? The woman and the others burst out into laughter. You mean Master Harion's son? One of them cackled. We should never have let him join the guild just because he was a Harion, another wheezed. Rota felt tears forming in his eyes. It burned like molten lava spewing from his eyes. Shut up! Rota yelled. What's wrong, boy? Does the truth hurt? The woman said with a twisted smile. Her eyes turned into those of an eagle's, cold, sharp, and powerful. Fear runs through her gaze. Motoka was worth less than his bar tab. This guild would be stupid to accept anyone affiliated with that low life. Rota's anger cooled off and froze over with unparalleled fear. He slowly stood up and walked away. He could still hear their mocking of his father, but he was too upset to care. As Rota was leaving, he was stopped by an old man that held out his hand to stop Rota from passing. Rota recognized the man as one of his father's friends. The man had obviously had a few too many drinks. The man had been crying. He had out a book. The man could barely mutter a word. Eventually the man did manage to say something. This is from your father. Rota didn't want to stay in this awkward situation, so he just took the book without paying the man any mind. Rota ran home. He had the strange book in his arms. Its weight was heavy. No, not really heavy, but its significance felt as if it were made of gold. Rota made it home. He lived in a small apartment-like complex. It was so small, he and his father had to share a living space. Used to. Now, to Rota, the small, run-down apartment felt as if it were too big to be only for himself. It felt lonely. Rota took a seat in one of the chairs in the small kitchen that also served as their dining room. Rota hadn't eaten all day, but he couldn't think about that. All that was on his mind was the book in his hands. He set it on the table. Rota didn't even look at it. He felt as if the book was so important that laying eyes on it might devalue it. Rota instead rubbed his hand across the cover of it. It was leather, much nicer than any book he or his father had ever owned. He didn't feel any sort of image or artwork on the cover of it. He did feel something etched into its surface. Rota finally gained the courage to look at the book. He saw what was etched into it was a foreign character. From Rota's years of schooling, he could tell that it was runic, an ancient language often called the tongue of the arcane. Though Rota couldn't speak or even read runic, he still recognized the letter written on the front of the book. It was the word for death. He could only remember it for the skull-looking shape of the character. For the first time since he had woken up this morning, Rota smiled. He chuckled at the irony that his father's passing gift would have death written on it. Rota opened the book. To his surprise, it was written in complete runic. My father didn't know runic, did he? If he didn't, why would he own a book of it? Suddenly, the runes began to shine a bright orange. Rota instantly felt stupid, as he remembered that you could write spells in runic. He had never seen a spell up close before. The runes began to jump off of the pages and dance around his head. As the pages of the book turned vigorously, and the words of the pages soared through the air, the runes appeared to dissipate and dye the world a vibrant shade of orange. Then, everything came to a halt. He looked around the new orange world confused. Then, a yellow mass began to emerge from the floor in front of him. The mass began to take shape of a human. It was Motoka. Motoka took a saddened sigh, then looked towards Rota. Hello, Rota. This is a prescribed illusion spell. If you are seeing this, I have died. Although not new information, hearing the words of Motoka's death come straight out of his own mouth hurt. As of the making of this, you are 13. As of the making of this, you are 13. And your mother, she... Rota winced, as he knew what his father was about to say. She passed away a couple months ago. Motoka sniffed and sighed a little before continuing. I hope that as you are seeing this, you are an adult, meaning that I am going to talk to you like one. Rota looked away from his father into the floor. Finances after your mother's unfortunate passing are not great. My job is very dangerous, which is why I always go on such safe expeditions. But recently I've had to go on more and more dangerous missions in order to take care of you. Don't be sad about this. Any expense needed for you is one that I'm glad to pay. But I fear that one day this may lead to my premature death. Tears began running down Rota's face. I am sorry for leaving you here alone so often, but we need money. I highly doubt that you will want to become an adventurer after seeing how difficult it was to support just the two of us financially. And that's okay. I just want you to follow your dreams, whatever they may be. I would tell you to go find some family to live with, but the only ones who I can name would be your grandfather, but I don't think he wants anything to do with either of us. If you want to leave this city, I recommend going north. Housing is a lot cheaper. Just know that whatever you do, I'll be proud. I love you. Motoka began to glow a bright orange. He then dissipated into the air. Rota looked around. The world had returned to its original color. He wiped the tears from his eyes. He closed them and began to think. He still wanted to become an adventurer, though he and his father had hard times in the past. Rota did not see his father's occupation as a bad thing. Rota believed adventurers to be noble and strong. Regardless of what he thought about adventurers, Rota didn't believe that it would be a good idea to join the Purple Roses Guild. Rota sat there, nodding off to sleep. But before he fell into unconsciousness, he had a thought to himself. What if I did it on my own? What if I made my own guild? Rota then fell asleep, looking mournfully at the past and uncertainly to the future.